Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I want to talk about the top 25 books now that I'm 25. I think that 25 is one of those years where you begin to look at things because you are now in the middle of your 20s. Like, this means you're like a proper adult now, and I'm kind of failing at life at the moment. Like, literally there's nothing I have achieved or anything. So I thought, well, let's look at 25 books. One for each year of your life. The first being Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl. I can remember reading this a few times as a child, and then they made a film about it. I remember being in year 4 and being sat around in a circle listening to the cassette of this. And I read this book in under an hour earlier this month when I found it, and then I really got it with the intention of showing it to my nephew, but then when he read about chickens being eaten, he really just told me to shut up because he owns chickens. So we'll see whether he changes his mind. He also doesn't like the fact that it's Fantastic Mr. Fox. You can tell his father is a farmer because he decided that he was going to shoot Mr. Fox, and every time we looked at Mr. Fox, he shot Mr. Fox, and after 5 pages I gave up and was going to show him another book instead, but then realised it's not the best book to show a 3-year-old as James and the Giant Peach, because parents die on the first page. 3-year-olds can't really get acclimatised to that idea yet. Don't know whether you knew that. I found this book funny. I read it again. Like I say, I read this at the start of this month simply as something to read, and I found that after 25 years of reading this book, I've probably read it about 5 times, and no, I've read it a lot in that time. It's my favourite Roald Dahl book. I know other people go for The Witches and Matilda and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Never got behind Charlie and the Chocolate Factory because we share a name, and I will never be able to ever read that book, ever. But this one, about a fox, and I've got something I kind of like, an anthropomorphic fox. I don't know why, but I do. So there you have it. Fantastic Mr. Fox. Highly recommend for any of your child relatives or even yourself if you're looking for a fun time. Or if you're vegan and you dislike the thought of eating animals and want to see them fighting back, then you could read this one. Although I will just point out that the fox does eat quite a few, chickens and other animals, but carnivores, kind of different. We have Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I've talked about this book enough before. The first book I ever owned. It is now still wrapped in cling film because I just don't know how to stick it together anymore. We've tried sellotape, we've tried everything, we've tried super glue, it's just not working. This book is falling apart and I might get a new copy at some point. But there is a lot of sentimental value attached to this book. It's the first book I ever owned. When I took it to my grandparents' house, my granddad took it off me. I believe it was the Sunday. By the Thursday I'd read it, and that's when I got it back. Then he proceeded to read the first 3, and as I've said before, that has created this very sentimental attachment to these books, and the Harry Potter books did help me to process grief, but I do very much appreciate this book, and it is my favourite book in the series, and as the first book I ever owned, it had to be on this list. It also is a bit more darker than children's fiction really ought to be, and yes, I'd say that there are definitely parts that now as an older person looking at the book and how long it is, there's definitely some stuff that could be cut out, but I do actually enjoy every single minute of it. And when Fred and George take them down into the kitchens, that is still a point that I wish had been in the films, because it's probably my favourite part of the series, because you get to see the kitchens, and when you're my size you like to see a kitchen. Then we have The Bed and Breakfast Star by Jacqueline Wilson. I believe my copy is actually crushed in my bedroom somewhere, because I really started reading Jacqueline Wilson when I was in year 4. I think the main age that we're going to be talking from is like 7 to now here. But this was the first book of hers that I'd read. And back then I was getting given pocket money, and my brother would walk me to the late shop every Saturday and I'd buy a book, and it happened that the one that I'd been reading at school, The Bed and Breakfast Star, was the one that I happened upon in the late shop. This book follows the character of Elsa, who is living in a bed and breakfast with her mother and stepfather. She also has half-brothers. She is dealing with the separation of her parents through using humour, but she doesn't get on with her stepfather or her family. She feels kind of isolated because her half-siblings have a connection to both her parents and she only has a connection to one, and she doesn't get on with her stepfather. And I used to read this book every single Saturday. I'd sit in bed holding it back because my brother would turn the light off in our room, and I would read it by the light off the landing. Probably blinding myself doing that, but it was a brilliant book for Charlie back then, and one that I always look back upon and remember extremely well, although it did take me years to get the joke, or else I'll get upset. It took me years to get that joke. Next we have City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I discovered urban fantasy when I turned 15, and then, I discovered this sort of urban fantasy when I turned 15, and then began to read it straight away. Cassandra Clare's are the only books that I have kept reading. I don't believe the books now are what they were when it started. I did not know any of the hype when I went into it. I don't think there was much hype for the books when I first started reading them. But as it's gone on, and there are now however many books there are in the series, I've not read Lord of Shadows. I downloaded an audiobook of it after saying I wouldn't read it. I'm not sure whether I'll ever read on with the series. I think I'm kind of done with it. But I appreciated this book for introducing me to urban fantasy, and at the time it did inspire me to go on and write my own urban fantasy novel, and because of that I think that's why I included it. I know that some people think this first book is boring. It did take me a while to get through. I didn't read it at first because it began with dialogue, and I was a stickler for not starting stuff with dialogue back then. This was the first book, young adult book I'd read as well, and it's on the list because of that. Whether I'll actually continue to keep this book, I don't know. Maybe it'll be worth something in years because this cover doesn't exist anymore, but still, I appreciate what this book did for me. Whether I'll ever read it again, don't know. Next we have some real urban fantasy, and that was Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This follows the character of Richard as he moves from Scotland to London and ends up embroiled in this whole sort of supernatural thing. Again, it's what I'd call proper urban fantasy. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the humour, I enjoyed the tale, and I really like how Neil Gaiman writes. I think there's something almost fairy tale about him, and I really enjoy the narratorial voice that he has within his works. Then we have The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicles. I'm not sure why I've included this book on this list. I got this book as a Christmas present. I never intended to read it, and then I read it, and I enjoyed it for a bit, and then the main character started to annoy me. A lot of stuff in the book annoyed me. I don't understand why the book goes on this long, yet I've reread it. I own the sequel, and I plan on rereading it, and it has elements in it that I always seem to think about and get drawn to. And there is a story that I want to see finished. So, I don't know. This book ended up on the list through the fact that I dislike it, but I also seem to like it, and it's left me in a quandary. Yes. At some points when I was reading it, it left me feeling how I felt when I first read Harry Potter, similarly to how I felt about the Robin Hood books. We Need New Names by No Violet Bulawayo. This was the book that when I started the list, it went straight down. This is actually my second copy of the book because I gave my copy away because I was doing that whole thing of if you really enjoy a book, give it to somebody, but I've missed the book since I took it off my shelf. And this was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2013. I read it in 2013. It was the only book off the short list that year that I'd wanted to read, although I did read others. This book has a turn in the middle of it, and it's only 2 pages, but those 2 pages affected me more than anything else that I think I've ever read in fiction. It was almost cinematic in scope. It left me feeling in a completely different way than I had felt originally going into the book. I think it is a startling piece of prose. I adore this book. I am so glad to have it back on my shelves. I'm wary to reread it because I feel as though what I enjoyed in it 4 years ago I might not enjoy now, but it's a book that I always think back to, and sometimes I wish it hadn't ended how it had, but I'm also glad that it's not all tied up and perfect, and I'm glad that the Luminaries won that year, so I guess you win some, you lose some. Next we have The Outsider by Albert Camus. I read this book 9 years ago now, and I still have The Rebel to read. Originally Abercrombie gave me The Rebel by Camus to read as well, and I found this book and I read it instead. I can't remember the main character's name, but I know that he is about to be executed, and it seems that the only crime he's committed is telling the truth. And because of that, because of his sheer honesty and people unable to view him as anything but this outsider, he ends up executed because it's the easiest way out. And I just really adored the book. It's a book that has stuck with me after 9 years. I actually lost my copy originally and didn't find it until last year and had to get rid of it because it turned out it had been under my bed and got a bit... It was the worst screwed up book I'd ever seen in my life. I think more people should read the book, and I can remember my tutor mentioning it at university and me immediately just jumping on and talking about the book because I think that it's a great book to read, and I just don't think people can appreciate that all this man is doing is telling the truth. And I think more people should read it and appreciate just what an outsider is and just what Camus is doing in his prose and what he is talking about. Next we have The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon, and this book is one book that I wish I'd written. I wish that I had written this book. I think that Joanna Cannon is a fantastic writer. I think that she writes with such a classic British voice. She mixes comedy with pathos, and she has a very strong story at the heart of it, and she talks about society in a close-knit community, and I can't wait for her next book because this was bloody brilliant. I recommend this book to everybody. I forced it upon a few of my volunteers this year, and I don't really want to hear a bad word about it because I think that it is fantastic, and this could possibly actually be my favourite book, really, because it has everything that I like in it. Joanna Cannon's style is so similar to Alan Bennett, and he is a writer that I admire very much, so to find this voice in modern fiction was very much appreciated. To read her words is just brilliant, and yes, it's a slow read, but it is worth it. It is completely worth it. Next we have The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver. This book reminded me of The Outsider in that the character Harrison is a bit of an outsider, and it talks about communism in the 1950s and how merely being associated with supposed communists was enough to see you on trial. I read that book and I read 50 pages and then put it down, and then when I went back and I just read the same 50 pages and then just went through it, I was hooked. I think that that book is a brilliant book. It's been 7 years since I read it, because in the 7 years since I've read it I've kept lending it out to people, and as I have mentioned I have no idea where my copy is in the world at the moment. Next we have The Rabbis Katmai by Johan Svar, and this is about a cat who gains the ability to talk, and the first thing that he does is lie. It talks about philosophy and religion and has some strange artwork in it, but is the first graphic novel that ever stuck with me, and a graphic novel that I actually had the intention of going out and purchasing. I just think about this book a lot. I just like the themes, and I liked seeing them in this format, and again, comedy, pathos, and an actual good philosophical discussion about theology was quite a good thing to read, and also the whole thing of like, cats can't be given bar mitzvahs will still be hilarious to me. Next we have The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton, which actually won the Booker Prize in 2013, and is a brilliant novel in that it is written in a Dickensian style. It introduces 13 characters, then goes back to tell you why they're all in the room, is related to the moon cycle, and also happens to have this idea that's quite similar to a classic western. There is a whodunit in here, and there is just a great talk about people in a town. It is exceptionally ambitious. Again, this is a book that took me a month to read. I'm very glad that I read the book. I feel like I achieved something in reading this book. I just really enjoy Catton's prose. Next is a book that I can't find, which is At Bertram's Hotel by Agatha Christie. I don't know which book in the Miss Marple novels this is, but it's the one I remember from seeing on screen when I was younger, and it is my favourite to listen to in the radio plays with June Whitfield, and it is my favourite to read. Miss Marple goes to a hotel, and there are many secrets and lies, and a murder happens, and there are false identities, and it is just brilliant, and I really like that one. In fact, that's probably the one that set me off on liking crime series on the television altogether, was just that one viewing of that film when I was younger, because it used to be on a lot. Next, we have Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson, and I have read this book a total of 4 times, I believe, and I first read this book during that period of unfathomable sadness last year that we don't talk about much anymore, and this book set me on to having, with Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, set me on to taking a creative break from my writing to find out what I really wanted to write about. But this book talks about anxiety, talks about depression, and it makes me laugh. It has me in hysterics, and it's not the best written book in the world, but Jenny Lawson has such a strong voice in her writing that it doesn't matter, and I am ever appreciative that this exists. And I know that whenever you're feeling low or anything, just turning to this book is enough just to bring a smile to your face, so that's why that's here. Also, probably one of my favourite book covers ever. Next, we have Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, and yeah, it's Lonesome Dove. It is my favourite book so far of this year. It is the classic Western novel, but it talks so much about life and what life is and what man is, and just about humanity in general. It is a book that I look forward to rereading as I get older. Next, we have The Lollipop Shoes by Joanne Harris. This is the second book to feature Vianne Rocher from Chocolat, but I didn't know this when I read it nearly 10 years ago now. It's the first time that I read about everyday magic in fiction and realised that you could do that, and also it did make me think that this was what magical realism is, but really I'd say that this is more like practical magic type magic. I wholeheartedly enjoyed this book. It set me on to really enjoying the works of Joanne Harris. And although I don't own many of her books anymore, I have kept The Lollipop Shoes and Peaches from Monsieur Le Curé because they are by far my favourites. Joanne Harris does experiment with her prose at times. She writes a wide variety of books. If you go to the Gospel of Loki, then you will enjoy yourself. She can write humorous things, and she can really talk about motherhood, which is what she does here. This book talks about motherhood and keeping secrets from your children, and the outside influences upon our children that we cannot control, and I think that it's a very brilliant book in that way, and I appreciate it more as I've gotten older than I did as a 15-year-old. Next, we have Nicholas Nickleby. This is on here simply because it is the first Charles Dickens book I ever read after years of saying he was my favourite writer and only seeing The Muppets Christmas Carol. It took me 2 years to read this book because it was just one of those that I could never get into because of the way Dickens wrote, but it gave me one of my favourite quotes in fiction: "The beauty of the earth is but a breath and man is but a shadow." And yeah, it's stuck with me. It has none of the other books of Dickens that I have read have ever seemed to reach the heights that this one does for me, and I think that is because the other ones I have listened to on audiobook, whereas this one I read the actual physical book, and I just think that it is brilliant. I know people don't really think that it's his best work, but for me, at the moment, it is. Next, we have The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, the second book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. I had to choose a book of Robin Hobb's to be on this list, so it just happened to be this one. It still is my favourite book of hers so far, and this is a book where a lot of stuff changes dramatically for the characters, but the ending of this book and events within this book made me go straight on into reading the third and final book in this trilogy. Hobb is someone who doesn't shy away from difficult themes in her prose. She will torture her characters, and she, even now when I'm reading her works, appreciating just what lengths she goes to give hints and suggestions as to where future books will go. Then we have Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I read this book for my second year of university, so that was about 5 years ago. And I, again, really enjoyed this book. It talks about sex and gender. Middlesex was the first book that I'd read by Jeffrey Eugenides. I really like Eugenides as a writer. I wish that I owned that book, but I actually borrowed it from somebody. And it's just one of those books that sticks in your mind, and so that is why it's on this list. Next, we have The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling, her first book after the Harry Potter series, and the only book post-Harry Potter that I actually really kind of enjoyed. This book sees a man die, but then talks about the community after he has died, and that is why I like it. It talks about the community. People say that in this book she likened herself to Trollope, I believe, Anthony Trollope, and I kind of agree. I haven't really read much Trollope, but that I have, I can see where she was coming from. This book is a very slow book, and then the last 100 pages it seems to move extremely quickly, and I do think that it is the best book she has written post Harry Potter, and I wish that she had stuck to writing that sort of thing, because the Cormoran Strike series just bombed for me. But her writing, I think, is at her best here, and I don't know why people doubted that she would be able to write this sort of book if they just looked at the Harry Potter series and see what she'd been doing there. Then we have No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. I borrowed this book from another student at university. I actually still have one of his books to get back to him. About a how-to guide for comics. So if someone, could let Dan know that'd be great, because I kind of have his book. Can't even remember what this book was about, but I think I read it over a weekend, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I went and watched the Coen Brothers adaptation, and I really enjoyed that as well. And I actually have the Border trilogy here to read, and I've never got around to it. And it's been, 6 years since I read this book? How old am I? I've completely forgotten how old I am. I've completely forgotten when I finished university. I don't know how old I am anymore. But yeah, I read this book. It was enjoyable. I really liked Cormac McCarthy's prose. It made me want to go and read more of his work. Just try what Adam at Memento Mori did and try and read them all in a year. But we know that'll never happen. I've never been able to stick to a deadline on anything. Then we have Public Library and Other Stories, a short story collection by Ali Smith that I read in 2015 and adored so much that I kept reading it in 2015 as well. I knew of Ali Smith before then, but had never read her works, and it was really the review of Jen Campbell that set me off to reading this. But there is a short story in there, I can't remember the title of it, but that was one that I kept going and reading, with this rose bush that seemed to be blooming out of a character's chest. And it really made me want to go and write some more short stories. I've never done it. I've never gone and written any short stories because I've stuck to writing Doris and writing what I know. But one day I'll take the plunge and be a bit more experimental myself. Then we have The Hours by Michael Cunningham. Watched the film, found out it was a book, found out it was related to Mrs. Dalloway, read this, read Mrs. Dalloway. Both of the books really highlighted for me different aspects of war that we were still living in at different eras in the last 100 years. Really enjoy that book, I enjoy the film, I enjoy everything about it. And again, is on this list because it became a favourite book for me. Then we have The Tiger's Wife by Taya Obrecht. This won the Orange Prize years ago. I cannot remember how many years. And back then, I think she was 25, and they were talking about how this young writer had managed to craft such a brilliant book. And now we're here. There's no sequel. There's no, second book. I don't know whether there will ever be a second book. But this book is still on my shelves, even though I don't even know if I'd like it after however many years it's been. I enjoyed this book. I like the mixture of folklore with telling the story of the main character. And at the time, this was a book that I was foisting upon people. So that's there. And finally, we have Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. I wish that I'd included this book on my favourites list of last year, because I think this book is thoroughly amazing. It talks about Jamaican life in a fashion that we're not used to seeing. We aren't used to seeing it beyond anything that is talking about tourism and trying to get you to go to there. But this is unflinching, and it tells you about people's struggles just to try and get by and try and lift themselves above the limitations that are put upon them by society. I think that everybody should be reading this book because of the themes that it talks about. I never knew about this part of the world until I read this book. I wish I'd known more about what was going on in this country, because I think that the things that are going on are awful. Whether they're still going on now after 20-something years, I don't know, but I was glad to see them put into fiction so that more people would get knowledge of what actually is going on when Jamaica isn't all about tourism and looking good. And that's 25 books. I don't think I've ever talked that much. I think I probably repeated myself 1,000 times, and I don't think I actually said anything that would get you to read these books, but those are the 25 books that have stuck with me for 25 years. That is a quarter of a century, and will I still be alive in another quarter of a century? We don't know. Look at the world at the moment. Anything could happen. I'm going to leave it there. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to discuss any of these books, please feel free to do so in the comments. And until next time, that is all.